Welcome again. I'm Dr. Jordan Taylor, the Undergraduate Exercise Science Program Director and Associate Teaching Professor at the University of Kansas. I'm in the studio today with Dr. Dimitrije Cabarkapa to discuss some interesting sports science research that he has conducted here at the University of Kansas, specifically pertaining to the sport of basketball. In 2021, Dr. Cabarkapa completed his doctoral dissertation in exercise physiology at KU, and he's now the Director of Basketball Research in the Jayhawk Athletic Performance Lab. Not only does he currently direct and conduct studies aimed at improving performance on the basketball court, but Dr. Cabarkapa has experience playing the game at a high level. Previously, he was a former Division I basketball player at James Madison University. And at James Madison, Dr. Cabarkapa was a proficient shooter from the field. He averaged 10 points per game, and his three-point field goal percentage was 40%, which is indicative of excellent shooting from beyond the arc. Dr. Cabarkapa also has some professional basketball experience as well. Welcome to the show, Dr. Cabarkapa. And who says tall guys can't shoot from deep, right?
Well, thank you. I appreciate a nice introduction. I have to say thank you to all my coaches, especially Coach Mike Dean, that taught me how to shoot ball proficiently.
Right.
I'll say there was a lot of practice, a lot of patience from his side, and a lot of hard work from both of us. To develop my, I'll say, solid shooting proficiency. Yeah.
Now I brought you something.
I love cheese.
This is Dr. Cabarkapa's favorite snack. Now tell me, which is more important to you, basketball or Cheez-Its?
Can we stop the interview and then?
I was going to say, I don't think he can get through the whole interview without having a couple handfuls here. But this was your secret to being a proficient shooter?
That was basically a secret. One Cheez-It, one made basket.
Is it an ergogenic aid? Do Cheez-Its have performance-enhancing benefits for basketball players?
Hold on, my question is: are we getting endorsed by Cheez-Its? Should we? Should I do promotion?
Right.
Eat Cheez-Its because? No, I love Cheez-Its. I think that was one of my favorite American snacks. You can hear my accent. I was born and raised in Novi Sad, Serbia. And
the Serbian sharpshooter.
Serbian sharpshooter. Yeah. Honestly, if you think about players in Europe, and if you think about, like, when I say in Europe, like former Yugoslavia, right? Like Serbia, Croatia, Bosnia, Macedonia, Montenegro, Slovenia, right? If you look at that region, there's a lot of sharp shooters coming from that region.
Yeah. There's definitely a history of that of shooters from that area. That's for sure.
Yeah.
And they brought the Euro step over here too, right?
They brought Euro step. Sometimes that to me looks like a travel, but
right.
I'm not a referee.
Well, you can get away with anything in the NBA, right? Come on.
Yeah. Well, if you're good like that, then if you're Kevin Durant or Steph Curry, LeBron James, that excellence doesn't come every day. That's special. So yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about your role, the research, some of the things you're involved in here at KU. Just briefly discuss your current role here at KU, and then some of the basketball-related studies you've conducted and published.
So, I'll start to answer your first question regarding my role. When people ask me, what do you do? I say I'm Director of Basketball Research. So people say, okay, you work with athletes or you teach? What are you doing? I was like, well, how I like to describe that is it's a more hybrid position, that I would say it's not very common, in my opinion, but I'll say with one foot, I'm in academia and research world, conducting research, publishing research, right? And with another foot, I'm like in a practical setting, actually working with athletes, collaborating with a lot of strength coaches, basketball coaches, right? So kind of
like a liaison, like a bridge.
Exactly. Yeah. So yeah. I call it. My position is where the rubber meets the road, right? It's kind of where the practical coaching experience is meeting that the need for that scientific background and scientific foundation to support all these practices that are implemented in everyday training regimens or training setting. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Well, let's get into talking about your recent paper that you published that's titled "Differences in Biomechanical Characteristics Between Made and Missed Jump Shots in Male Basketball Players." So can you kind of describe the purpose, hypothesis, and methods that were used for this study?
So as the title of this paper says, the purpose was actually to analyze differences in these kinematic characteristics, biomechanical characteristics between made and missed jump shots, right? But you have a lot of research that you can find. Not a lot, when you compare to cancer research, diabetes research, and usually people say, well, how do you compare to that? And my mentor, Dr. Andy Fry, right, he likes to use analogy, we shouldn't put cancer research, diabetes, cardiovascular, and then sports science here. We should actually kind of flip it. Instead of being hierarchical, right. English pronunciation, right? To be a continuous on a continuum.
Continuum, right?
So
spectrum.
It is, spectrum. Yeah. What are you interested in? What drives you? When people ask me, okay, different questions about my job, right? I say I wake up and go to work because I want to, not because I have to. Well, I have to, but also the main thing is, because I want to, because it drives me to research, to answer some questions that maybe were developed during my playing career, right? But regarding this specific paper, we try to utilize methodology that can be implemented by every single coach, right? So people ask, how can you do that, right? So we do a lot of research with 3D markerless motion capture system that cost thousands of dollars.
Right, the DARI system.
Yeah, the DARI system. There's some other systems and companies that we're collaborating with. But, if you think about, for example, the system that you mentioned, it is pricey, right? For maybe that is not available for some high school coach or some college environments are maybe not able to afford it, right? Internationally as well, right? So how can somebody analyze the shooting performance, right? So there's a free tool, Kinovia, right? Like a video analysis software that anybody can use, right? With the Microsoft platform. It doesn't work for Mac, I don't know why. But you can actually go in and analyze these shooting mechanics, right? So that's kind of what's the practical side of this paper and this research that we are doing. And that comes back to my position, the question that you asked me regarding my position or kind of the purpose of research where we're getting into. But basically, it was to examine what small differences exist that can actually kind of distinguish between made and missed shot, jump shot, right?
Right. And so in this markerless system, it used to be, I can think when they made, EA Sports made video games, they would have the markers on each joint. Yeah. And then you would have an athlete perform various, shooting, layups, dunks, passing, and you'd capture that motion at each joint. Now the system, like with DARI that you're using here in the Jayhawk Athletic Performance Lab, you don't have to put those markers on the body, and you can assess things like a 2-point jump shot, a 3-point jump shot. Yeah. And you can look at various kinematic variables, which maybe you can explain what those kinematic variables are and what we looked at, say, in this this figure 1 here. Like, what exactly were you examining?
So, I will say this research study did not use that technology just because we wanted to be kind of more practical, more, the broad spectrum of people, coaches can use it, right? But what you just said, that is actually an avenue of research that we're, pursuing right now. We're using markerless motion capture system technology to analyze kinetic and kinematic variables. And to answer your question, and for our audience, maybe some people might not be familiar with it, right? When somebody talks about kinetics, right, it is pertaining to motion, right? For example, force, ground reaction force, that can be one of the example of kinematic variables. But if we talk about kinetic variables, but kinematic, on another hand, is pertaining to position, right? If we're talking about knee angle, right? So that is
just a description of motion.
Description of the motion, exactly.
Kinematics.
So, in this paper, as I say, while these high-level, I'll say expensive technologies can allow us to obtain a deeper insight and analyze these biomechanical parameters on shooting motion, I'll say on another level. The purpose of these studies that we're actually going to discuss is looking at technology, right? I mean, everybody has a phone that you can 30 frames per second, that you can record motion, right? And you can utilize that video to analyze these shooting parameters, right? So there's actually methodology that we developed, and if somebody's interested, you can reach out to me. I'll send you some papers, where you can actually see how we have approached that. But how I like to do it, I like to separate emotion on the preparatory phase and release phase, right? So preparatory phase is kind of initial concentric phase of the shooting motion, while you still have a ball in your hands, and while you're kind of squared up to the basket and preparing to shoot that ball. And then second phase, release, kind of the time point of the ball release. So as you can see in these figures right here, that is actually how we distinguish. For example, knee angle, hip angle, shoulder angle, elbow angle, elbow height. This was just elbow height was adjusted. If I'm 6'10" and if somebody else was
5'6".
if you were shooting next to me, we will have to adjust the elbow height.
Right, it's relative based on your height. Yeah.
So that is again that was also incorporated in kind of heel height. We could have used force plate, flight time to determine, but again, that is all equipment that cannot be implemented in everyday setting. So we try to use something that's available to everyone. So it's some coach that might not have access to this high level performance analyzing tools can analyze actually shooting motion. But yeah.
And so you were looking at these different kinematic variables, all these different joint angles, like you mentioned, hip angle, elbow angle, heel height at the top of the jump shot, trajectory of the ball, the entry angle, at what angle it goes into the basket, all these different things. Now, how many feet from the basket? What was the range you were looking at here in this study?
When we say 2-point, I usually go 17-footers.
Okay.
That is kind of
mid-range jumper.
Mid-range jumper. Yeah. I think that is the distance commonly implemented in our research studies, and then 3-point line. It's depends for if we have done actually research that is unpublished, and we're actually very close to publishing research on female athletes, female basketball players doing the similar things, right? So we're expanding on that side as well. That is unpublished, but hopefully, keeping my fingers crossed that they will be published soon. But I'll say for this study that we have mentioned here, for 2-point shooting. For 2-point jump shots, right? We have actually looked at elbow height, and what I previously mentioned, there was a significant difference between made and missed shots in elbow height. So made shots were characterized by higher elbow positioning.
Right, and you see that here in Table 1 is what we're talking about.
Regardless of the player height, right? If me or you were shooting a basketball, right? So there was something that maybe coach, if there's an issue with a 2-point jump shooting motion, right? That maybe coach can actually intervene and analyze and actually looked at compared to these, I'll say descriptive statistics here, and actually look at where that player, falls on that range for the elbow height.
Looking at elbow height, I remember I had a basketball coach from my hometown that used to always say when you shoot, reach out of the phone booth and into the cookie jar, again, just little coaching cues, right, are very important.
But just to piggyback on what you just said, I mean, coaching cues, and I think that motivates us to conduct research in Jayhawk Athletic Performance Lab. We're, usually, which I think it's an issue in the sports science world, and you can correct me if you think I'm wrong, but I think that sports scientists or professors or people in the academic world come to coaches and say, this is what I found, you have to do it, you must do it. And then, you're coming to a coach that's maybe has 10, 20, 30 years, Hall of Famer, with extensive coaching experience, winning record, right? It would be the same thing if, I go into office and I tell Coach Self, hey, this is how you have to coach. Really?
Right.
I think that door would close faster than it opened, So
you almost have to approach it kind of passively, like, hey, if you're interested, these are some of my findings.
Exactly.
This is what we found looking at, what these different kinematic variables, these different joint angles, and what determines shooting proficiency versus not being proficient, elbow height being one of them. And then I guess if we go into table, that was for just 2-point shots, right?
Yeah,
so the main factor that I'm seeing here on these mid-range jump shots
was the elbow height.
Elbow height.
And I really like, just to piggyback.
Meaning higher elbow, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right,
yeah,
exactly.
higher elbow placement or positioning, however
Right.
you want to call it. But you used the analogy of coaches, right? And the reason why I kind of digressed a little bit here is actually just to say that our research is driven by coaches, right? So coaches actually bring ideas. We have a panel of advisory board
Right.
that are experts, from Coach Mike Dean, which was my former coach that I previously mentioned, Coach Andrea Hootie, which I think is one of the best strength conditioning
Yep.
coaches. I mean, Coach Ramsey, Najim is on our advisory board. So, we're actually driven from by feedback from
Right.
well-established coaches. And I'll say this.
Because they can, obviously, you're going to come to you with ideas and things that they want you to look at, and basically you can validate their coaching practices
Exactly.
and how they implement things with your research.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And say, yes, you're doing this the right way, or, well, maybe based on what we found, we maybe can tweak something here
Exactly.
or there.
Yeah. I think that it's more, it's not what they need or must do. It's how can we help you? I think that is approach how sports scientists should come, just to be a team player.
Right.
You're not the main player or star. No, you're just, as a sports scientist, and I think that's my advice for everybody, you're just a part of the team, and just one piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, and coaches are going to be receptive if you're going in there and you're telling them, I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel and make you totally change how you're coaching. I mean, that's on you. You're successful. You're doing great. But, if we could help your players increase their, field goal percentage by 5-8%, I mean, 10%, whatever, why not?
That is of critical importance, and you mentioned that example of one of the coaching cues, cookie jar, right?
Yeah, out of the phone booth into the cookie jar.
Yeah, but if you look at the table 2 right here, you can actually see that release angle was greater, right? So for made shots, release angle was greater. So the simple analogy, reach into the cookie jar, right?
Right.
I mean, you shouldn't probably instruct every player, well, this is your shoulder flexion, this is how much degrees you have to attain. No.
Right, because they're going to be thinking too
exactly.
much. Right.
Reach into the cookie jar. Oh, okay. I'll just raise my, greater shoulder flexion, right? So I do think that is a great analogy of that these coaching cues can be implemented,
And we'll talk more about coaching cues at the end, but I guess if we get into, so just summarizing table 1 there, elbow height was the main predictor of made 2-point jump shots from about 15 to 17 foot, having really getting that elbow up. If we look at table 2 and we go into 3-point shots, so a little bit deeper, there's a lot more, asterisks here, significant p-values, meaning, these are where you're seeing significant differences between made and missed shots. So we've got, maybe talk about each one of these variables, hip angle and elbow height, release angle, heel height, maximal trajectory height.
So I previously mentioned how I like to split the shooting motion to the preparatory phase and release phase, right? So during the preparatory phase of the shooting motion, while the feet are still on the ground, right, at the initial concentric phase of the shooting motion, right, less trunk lean, or I will say less trunk lean in these numbers shows greater hip angle values, right? So if I had a greater hip, or actually greater value here for a hip angle, that means that my torso would be in a more vertical position. It was lower, it would be kind of more flexed. So in this way, kind of standing up, don't lean too much forward.
Having a vertical torso is an important predictor of a made 3-point shot. And honestly, I know we're kind of deviating here, but if you think about youth that shoot and you watch them, and obviously they haven't developed the strength yet, but the further they get out from the basket, the more their torso, there's more of an acute angle between their torso and their thighs. So they're kind of hunched over, and they're almost jumping forward towards the basket as opposed to straight up.
That is exactly what you just said. Now we're coming back, jumping towards the basket. Well, I will say this. Yeah, you have to have a certain amount of lean, right? You can't be fading back and falling away. But, what's the line? What is enough of that flexion? I think that is important. But again, if we think about this, you mentioned releasing it at the top of your jump. So heel height we actually use as a representative of vertical jump displacement,
vertical
right?
Jump
so actually
height,
jump. Instruct players to jump, right? Because you're moving away from the basket, right? It is becoming more difficult shot. Actually, today, I just received an email regarding the acceptance of another manuscript where we actually look at differences in these biomechanical parameters between free throw, 2-point, and 3-point shot. So again, if you are interested, we can send you that paper. That is actually something recent, some of the recent research projects that we have conducted in published
Right.
as of today, hopefully. Yeah. So, but yeah, I mean, you can actually say that shooting motion, I think it's very complex, and this is just one segment, that can be analyzed.
Right.
And I think that these new technologies will allow us to analyze the shooting motion in more depth and in more
Right.
detail. But again, if you think about this, just okay, release angle. So I released the ball with a greater angle, okay, and I jumped higher. Well, if you think about this maximal trajectory height, well, it's probably a result of greater jump height and a greater release angle, right?
Right.
So, changing one thing, I think I call it a chain reaction.
Right. It's a kinetic chain. So
exactly.
If one part of that chain is altered, then the other parts of it will be as well. So, yeah. All right. Well, let's see. So I guess basically with this study, just to kind of summarize it, if you could kind of give the overall just conclusion, like if we go to the conclusion paragraph, this is kind of the meat and potatoes, right? This is what people, coaches, what athletes, what they want to know based on this study.
Yeah. So based on this study, I think that the findings of the study that we just discussed in these Table 1 and Table 2 results that are presented, instructing athletes to keep the torso in more erect position during the preparatory phase of the shooting motion, or having greater release angle and vertical jump at a time point of the ball release. I think that there would be some cues that can be given to athletes to improve their shooting performance, to elicit more made versus missed shots,
Right.
jump shots.
Okay. Well, let's move on to this other study now that you have published as well recently, and it's titled Kinetic and Kinematic Characteristics of Proficient and Non-Proficient 2-point and 3-point basketball shooters. So in this study, again, let's describe the purpose, the hypothesis, and the methods that were used for this one.
So in the previous one, we kind of looked at actually shots that were made and missed. This one, we actually looked at shooters that were split based on, I'll say, our criteria, kind of defining proficient, non-proficient. Again, for this study, the criteria was used based on a pool of participants, that participated. I mean, if these were professional players, we actually have the study that I just previously mentioned were professional players. So criteria for, kind of, well, you can't call professional players good or bad. I mean, they're good. So
right.
I'll say more proficient or proficient,
Right,
that's how we can
right.
split it, right? But again, I think that these 50% cutoff for 2-point and a 40% cutoff for 3-point were kind of adjusted for these individuals that, for this pool of participants that we examined in this study that had previous experience, playing experience, right, high school and above, and that currently participate in recreational activities involving basketball, right? But so we actually kind of expanded on this and look at stationary and step-in shooting approaches. So if you think about stationary, just directly facing the basket, there's a lot of times like shots where you actually come off the screen, so you're coming left, right, okay, coming from the left side, or you're coming from right side.
Right, coming off the screen.
Yeah, exactly, right, left, and then taking a pull-up jump shot, right? So this is kind of what we examined in this study, and the purpose was similar, to look at some of the variables, kind of kinetic and kinematic characteristics, and actually see where is the difference, right? What discriminates proficient from non-proficient 2-point and 3-point shooters, right? That's something that we were mainly focused for. This one, we recruited 29 recreationally active males again, and the previous study had 580 attempts that were analyzed, and they were kind of straight to the basket. That did not involve step-in shooting approaches, but this one kind of took a step further, and it was around 1,800 shots that were analyzed. And when you actually think about it, sitting in the front of a computer, and I have to say thank you to all research assistants in our lab that helped me with this process. But this is tedious. You really have to be precise. Analyze every single shot to the best of your ability. I mean, it takes time, but again, the time and effort that we put in, my hopes are that practitioners, coaches can actually use these findings to help other players improve their shooting performance. But To come back to this, what you just mentioned, we use high definition cameras, right? Such as you can actually adjust the frame rate on your on these newer iPhones. Well, I don't want to promote iPhone or Android, whatever you prefer, right? But we actually found that there was a significant difference in some kinematic variables, which kind of we hypothesized. But again, if we look at a kinematic, which is a force, like peak concentric force, peak landing force, impulse, there was no difference, which was actually very interesting. So if you look at this table, figure 1, I'm sorry. So that actually represents that proficient shooters during the preparatory phase had a greater elbow flexion and a higher elbow positioning. Right? And at the time point of the ball release, they had a greater release angle. Yep. So when we entered these
ties back in with the other study we talked about. Yeah,
exactly. And when these variables are entered into that multivariate discriminant function analysis model, right? We can discriminate between proficient and non-proficient shooters in 62.1% just based on these 3 variables. Again, people say, well, that's the only thing. No, I'm saying this is the part of the puzzle. It's not the only thing. We didn't look at wrist mechanics. We didn't look at kinematic chaining. We didn't look at, there are other variables that are part of this. But again, I feel like expectation is that everybody likes one-sentence summary. Well, it is what I have to do. Well, in order to know what you have to do, there's thousands and thousands of hours that research scientists, coaches have to spend analyzing these shooting motions. So I think our ultimate goal is to, hopefully, I have a single space, probably 7 or 8 pages, and it's increasing, still going on. Research ideas, what are the future directions and stuff. But I think that this is just a piece of the puzzle that can help basketball coaches or players improve their shooting performance.
Right. And I like how you're looking at different shots, too, because there's so many things you can analyze. You could analyze, a point guard coming down in transition and pulling up and shooting off the dribble. That may be totally different. The variables and the things that determine a made or missed shot may be different there versus, like you said, curling off a screen, stepping in, pulling up, hitting a jump shot from the elbow. There's so many different things you can look at. So so again, I guess kind of to summarize that figure 1, the elbow angle, the greater elbow height, greater release angle, those were all basically positive predictors for made shots.
Yeah, I think that was something that, should be instilled into those coaching cues when instructing players and when basically, coaching them to improve their shooting performance. Right. And I think that if you look at a figure 2, there's, I'll say, elbow flexion remained there, right? But there are 2 other variables we know when you're attempting shots.
So now we're looking at 3-point.
We're looking at 3-point shot. Yeah. Yep. So if you look at actually this figure, you can actually see that less hip flexion, which actually less hip flexion, people will think lean forward. No, actually less hip flexion is or less torso lean is keeping the torso
more vertical torso.
More vertical torso. So you can see that actually there's a certain amount of lean, but too much, again, it's bad, right? So less hip flexion, greater elbow flexion, and a greater vertical jump height or vertical jump displacement at a time point of the ball release. Those were the 3 things that actually discriminated proficient from non-proficient 3-point shooters in 81, almost 82% of cases. So, these numbers are pretty good. And I think which is also interesting from this study that it is mentioned here in the discussion section and in the results, but there was no difference in these kinetic and kinematic variables between stationary and step-in shooting approaches. And I do think that, I'll tell you this, I cannot say, well, that's what it is, that's what we found. Well, yeah, we found that, but I do think that there is just another avenue or another idea that in another direction that we have to take our research to examine why is there no difference. I believe that there is a difference somewhere, but how can we, improve that? That's to be determined based on our future research and our future research direction. So, yeah.
And just for those of you that are looking at these figures, so yeah, for both the 2-point shooting and the 3-point shooting, the figure 1 and figure 2 there, the proficient shooting mechanics are there on the first 2 columns on the left.
Yeah.
So you see preparatory phase, pro, and then release phase, pro, versus the 3rd and 4th columns on the right. You see what, the hip angles, the elbow angles, the heel height, what that looks like in a non-proficient shooter.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
that is me. I mean, I think you're referring to, the left side, the proficient one,
Hey, if you were shooting 40% from the arc at James Madison, I'm thinking that it probably was hard for you to adjust your mechanics to shoot non-proficiently, right?
I will tell you
I mean, you
this.
actually have to think how to shoot poorly. You know what I mean?
I'll say this. I already mentioned, Coach Mike Dean. That's I call him a life coach and a basketball coach. I mean, we have a close relationship. But like, he would know. He would look at me, and before I shoot at basketball, he would know. Nope, that's off. Nope, that's not good. And actually, I think that I started figuring out later on year after year after we were working out. I mean, to this day, I appreciate his, patience with me because, I used to wake up at 6 a.m., come there 6:30, work out with him, have a team workout. He would stay, work out with me, teach me these, proper type, I'll say proper biomechanical characteristics of shooting motion, right? So, to me, I think that how you approach shooting motion is of critical importance. He always mentioned there's always rule of 5 P's, right? Proper preparation prevents poor performance, right? So I like to say that and use that analogy because, as I previously mentioned, he can just look at me and he said, nope, that's off, that's wrong, that's wrong. So actually, without looking at a miss or made outcome, right? Sometimes some shots goes in because, okay, it's a lucky shot, right? But again, I'll say 90 to 95% of cases, if I had a wrong feet positioning, if my elbow was, too far away from my body,
even in your preparatory phase of shooting, you can tell that's just off. When he releases it, he's not going to make it. Yeah.
So that is I think something that
coach's eye.
Yeah, coach's eye. Yeah.
And we're kind of deviating here, but before we get into the conclusions, because I want to summarize this second study, just one more question I thought of. So, did Coach Dean, you did all this extra work with him in college? Did he really try to tweak your shot, like your mechanics coming out of high school, or did you have pretty solid mechanics in high school, and there was just little minor adjustments? I mean, how did that translate going from high school to Division I? I mean, was there a lot of work that you had to do on your shot, or not?
I will say this. I trusted him, and I think it's always trust is a big factor working with any athletes. You have to establish that connection that you trust that person, right? I was a good shooter. I was a solid shooter, right? I mean, like European guys, I mean, if you're recruiting European player, they're probably a good shooter. I mean, this is a stereotypical thing, but again, that's kind of what it is, just because of a game and style of game. And Cheez-Its, yeah. Well, I think that this is a great thing. After this, we got to sit down and discuss how can we bring Cheez-Its to Europe and Serbia. Maybe we can feed these shooters, so Luka Doncic, Nikola Jokic, all these guys can actually shoot much better. But they already shoot great, but even better.
Right.
But anyway, so, to mention that, I think that I had a solid shooting. I was a solid shooter, but I think when I started working with him, when I started implementing these cues, it just opened my mind that, I can feel it when that shot is not going to go in.
Yep.
And if you look at it, I mean, I think it's Steph Curry's example. He would just shoot a ball and turn around and just walk away.
Yeah, he knew. Yep.
He knows, right? So if you are a good athlete, and if you have all these cues established, right, and if you keep that motion consistent.
Yep.
I mean, what happens after? You can't worry what happens after.
I mean, it's ingrained into the brain. It's an implicit, just learned memory that you don't even have to consciously think about. It's just, it's ingrained, that motor learning and that pattern of movement. Muscle memory. I did a video on muscle memory before, but think of I can remember Michael Jordan shooting a free throw with his eyes closed, and it's
his eyes closed.
You have that proprioception, that feel of where all your joints are in space, and you just release it, and whether you're going to make it or not. So let's get back to the conclusions now for this second study we're talking about. So just kind of summarize what you found.
So for this study, I would say instructing athletes to position elbow higher and increase elbow flexion during the preparatory phase of the shooting motion. and increase shoulder flexion at a time point of the ball release to achieve that greater release angle would be some of the cues that would be given to improve 2-point. They were found to distinguish proficient from non-proficient 2-point shooters. If we looked at a 3-point shooting motion, again, that elbow flexion remains. So instructing athletes to increase elbow flexion, such as we've seen in a 2-point shooting motion, keep their torso in near vertical position during the preparatory phase of the shooting motion, and jump higher at the release phase of the shooting motion would be some of the coaching cues they would be giving to athletes, if that's needed, again, to improve 3-point shooting performance.
Right.
And I think this is an important thing to mention here. Are you going to change Luka Doncic shooting mechanics, or are you going to change Kevin Durant, Steph Curry shooting mechanics?
Right.
Well, time out. That's where you draw a line and say, okay, what's needed if you're working with that's why I think that it's very important to teach these cues from young age, right?
Right.
I think that actually coaching kids and it takes more time to correct bad mechanics than teach proper mechanics, in my opinion. Again, someone might disagree with me, but
because again, you're having to undo that pattern of movement that has been learned, and it's an implicit memory in the mind. And undoing those bad mechanics, like you said, that's a lot of work. And in any sport, whether it's a baseball swing, golf swing, I mean, sprinting mechanics, you're right. I totally agree with you on that. It's like they need to be taught at a young age early on so that those clean, good shooting mechanics are just followed throughout.
Speaking of, I'll tell you this. Speaking of golf mechanics, I don't know why, but that is just not sticking to me. I'll tell you this. I started getting into golf, and I love going there, but the golf course looks unbelievable. It's a hole next to hole when I go there, and if you and I would probably go to play golf, you would probably shoot your age, and I'll probably shoot my weight. So it will be 200 and something. But anyways, I do think that is it is what you learn, and I do think that practice. I mean, practice and hard work. I think in dedication to practicing these and implementing these coaching cues, I think it's of critical importance. And if you have maybe a younger kid that's trying to shoot a basketball that's heavy, there might be, I would say, improper biomechanical parameters incorporated into it, right?
Right.
So if you think actually about that, I think that it's better to adjust that and teach that young kid so he or she can actually shoot that basketball with a proper mechanics. So, to prevent some corrections in the future from that improper biomechanics.
And some of that when you're younger, it's a strength thing. It's obviously coordination. You're kind of growing into your nervous system. There's a lot of things there that play into it, which actually mentioned strength. So kind of getting into another study you did. So you have research published examining the relationship between upper and lower body strength on basketball shooting performance. So is there a significant relationship between upper body strength and or lower body strength on shooting accuracy?
That is, I will say there was no statistically significant relationship. So people say, oh, okay, strength, not important, I'm not going to train. Hold on, I think that's where you have to take a time out and actually look closely to what was said in that paper. The main thing I think that people skip over is participants. Who were your participants? So our participants in that study were resistance trained individuals with previous basketball playing experience.
Right. So they already have a fundamental baseline level of strength, and you're going to assume it's an adequate level of strength.
Yeah. So if you take untrained and examine that, there might be a different finding. But again, we had individuals with resistance training background, and we looked at their relationship between free throw, 2-point, and 3-point shooting performance with strength. 1RM bench press, barbell bench press, and 1RM back squat strength, right? Which is kind of commonly tested in exercise setting, right? But again, there was no relationship. But again, non-observed statistically significant relationship, right? Like that is non-existent, doesn't mean that strength is not important. It is just another piece of a puzzle that raises a question and avenues for further research. How much strength is enough? where do I draw a line as a strength coach to say, okay, this person is strong or powerful enough, and let's work on something else. Let's
Right.
work on improving rate of force development, this, that. I mean, I think there are different avenues, but pure strength, right? If we're talking about that, okay, where do I draw a line, and where do I say, okay, this is enough? So I think that doesn't exist there yet. I think that future research should
Right.
examine that, and that is one of the research avenues that we're doing. But I also do want to mention this, that we have published this study a couple of years ago, I'd probably say 3 or 4 years ago, that actually looked at, it was a 6 or 7 years retrospective analysis of individuals, Division I athletes, elite Division I athletes that actually advanced to play on professional level, NBA, professional level, or professional level overseas, or
Right.
they did not play. And guess what the findings say? The stronger and the more powerful, the greater chances are to play in a higher league. So
Right, and it makes
strength
sense.
is important, right?
I mean, well, look at some of the
right?
athletes in the NBA these days. I mean, they're
Yeah.
they look different than the ones in the '80s. That's for
Yeah,
sure.
that is for sure. Yeah.
But of course, strength and conditioning, the whole field has grown so much, and our knowledge of how to train athletes. I mean, it's just really developed and taken off over the years. I mean, so. Which I guess kind of leads into, and you kind of answered it. Yes, strength training is important for basketball players. Now I've got a question. Now this is interesting, I think, to think about. So, should players strength train first and practice shooting later? Or should they practice shooting first and then strength train, right? Because we're thinking how to program all this in the week, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you're meeting with the strength and conditioning coach, plus then there's class times and only certain times you have available. You've got practices, you're in season, off season. Or maybe would it be advisable on certain days, you shoot first, then strength train, and then the next day you strength train, you do it the opposite.
I'll say that all depends on the training regimen, but I'll say this: I'll have a better answer maybe in a month, because we just finished data collection for a study that was funded by National Strength and Conditioning Association.
Okay.
That is examining acute influence of resistance training, resistance exercise on basketball shooting accuracy.
I had no idea. I really didn't know that. So you're looking at this.
Yeah,
okay.
We actually received grant for this, and I think that is a big practical importance. Should I lift before I practice, right? So we actually looked at through our 2.5 hour period, right, after you lift upper body, lower body, or control, no lifting, right? How that affects your shooting mechanics and accuracy.
Because it feels different.
Yeah.
I can think back, I played in high school point guard, and I can think on days where I would lift and then go shoot.
Yeah.
It's totally different after you lift, especially, your shot, it just feels different. And then probably because a lot of that, your neuromuscular system's primed, it's turned on, those motor units are cranking and ready to go. Or then you go in the next day and you shoot first and then work out. I mean, it's just a totally different feel.
Yep.
But I think, as you get stronger, no matter what, obviously you've got to keep shooting to adjust.
I agree.
I don't know how to put it other than it just feels different.
It does feel different. I mean, I think that there's a lot of unanswered questions, why that happens and how that happens. But I think that this is just another piece of the puzzle, another step towards us examining what is different, what is actually, is there a difference, or, should you, if there is a difference, again, I didn't statistically analyze data yet because we just finished
Do you have a theory? Like, what is your thought? I know we have to check back in a year when you get the study published. And I mean, would you be willing to go out on a limb and say, like, what would you do if an athlete came to you and said, well, when do I do my strength training?
I'll say hypothesis is hypothesis, right? And until we have data to prove it, right? So I learned this a couple of years ago. This is American saying, "In God we trust. Everybody else bring data."
Right.
So I mean. You say what, and that's the thing. If you go and ask coaches or if you ask players, should you lift before practice? No. Should you lift? Yeah. If you ask me, I was like, I don't care, right? When I played. So what is right? Yes, no, or I don't care. Well, that's why we actually conducted this study, and we appreciate funding by National Strength and Conditioning Association. that was given to us to examine this, because I think this is a big project. It took a lot of time and effort, and I'll say personnel to accomplish this. But we're really looking forward to analyze these findings. And again, maybe we can touch base.
I'll give you my hypothesis and my thought. I think it would be best. This is my thought. To some days you shoot before you strength train, and other days you shoot after. I mean, that's my thought.
Okay, well, we can, you come back and we do another study. Let's do it.
All right.
It's just a different approach. We can do it for sure.
Okay, so now I got kind of a personal question. So, how can the findings, conclusions of your research be applied by basketball coaches and players to improve their shooting proficiency? So, for example, I have a cousin. Shout out to Dawson Taylor. He's playing his freshman year of basketball at Dodge City Community College out in Western Kansas. So how might some of your research benefit him and help make him a better shooter? Like what? And this kind of ties into the next question. What coaching cues would you give somebody at his level that's playing their freshman year in college versus, say, a youth, a high school, or a professional athlete? I mean, what coaching cues you're gonna give to each of those levels to help make someone more proficient?
Yeah, I will say this. First of all, I drove from Lawrence to Denver and west. I never thought I would live in Kansas. I love actually Kansas, eastern side of Kansas, but western side, it's kind of flat. It's like
you can see for miles, and there's nothing but miles to see.
I've been to, I guess I have, but I will say this: there's some good sharp shooters coming from Tribune, Kansas. Actually,
from Tribune, okay.
One of my buddies, Johnny, right? He's actually he can shoot pretty good, right? But anyway, so I'll say I think that if you take that approach to analyze somebody's shooting performance, it has to be individual. I think that we're getting to that point that strength training, nutrition programs, right? Everything is on an individual basis, right? It was before, 20 years ago, you can say, okay, well, this is a program, everybody does it. You do 225 for 5 times and you're good. Well, hold on. Does that apply for each athlete, right? So I think that one of the first things that when I work with athletes, I really like to let them shoot. Let me see who they are, what's their mechanics, what is their that biomechanical print or pattern, however I call it, right, for shooting mechanics. So I let them shoot. I see maybe where there might be area for improvement, right? How critical is to improve that? Again, if you're talking about somebody that's actually, let's say, Division I player, that already established maybe shooting with the feet a little bit on the side, but it's shooting good percentage. Do you change that? I think that is a fine line, where you say, okay, well, yes or no. But I do think that there's definitely other aspects that will have to be considered.
Generally speaking, you're going to make more dramatic changes when a player is younger versus if they're shooting well older and they still have kind of a funny looking shot.
Yeah.
Well, they're still hitting a high percentage of shots, so it's like you said, you maybe do a minor tweak, but nothing major.
I will say this: one of the things that I cannot accept is that lateral elbow deviation, right? And we talk about somebody shooting like this, right? Pushing the ball. I do, that elbow. I think it has to be aligned with the body, and there's actually, we're coming back to part of the dissertation, my dissertation, that kind of looked at a free throw shooting mechanics. That difference between, again, proficient and non-proficient free throw shooters was also in elbow placement, right? However, more lateral deviation was kind of related to lower shooting percentages. So tucking that elbow in and aligning it with a shooting plane of motion, I call that lateral deviation, but tucking that elbow in and aligning with a shooting plane of motion, an imaginary vertical axis, I think it's of critical importance for proper shooting accuracy.
Right. Yeah. Elbow being tucked in line with the shoulder, high elbow when you release the ball.
And then cookie jar.
Yep. Out of the phone booth and into the cookie jar, right? Into the cookie jar, so that wrist flexion, right, at the top. So, which obviously plays a role in the backspin on the ball and everything else.
Oh, well, I don't even want to talk. I don't even want to get into the backspin, the ball, because it's like that is critical. I do think, shooting a ball without backspin. People think that ball, it travels forward, so it has front backspin. Actually, no, the ball, actually has a backspin. So the ball spins in a different way, in a different direction. Well, we're getting in the Magnus force and the lift off. Anyways, but
that backspin is going to help create the proper trajectory and entry angle for it to go into the basket. I'm trying to remember, what is the entry angle, like the minimum entry angle the ball has to be at to actually enter the hoop?
Previous research, theoretically determined research, mathematical computations using physics, right? 32 degrees. They say the entry angle, if this is basically the rim and this is your angle, that internal angle that you're looking, it has to be above 32 degrees in order to get in, right? So to clear that first rim. But another question, that people love to ask, okay, well, should I aim for the center of a basket? I was like, well,
I was just going to get into that.
Yeah.
When a player is shooting, what should they aim for? The front of the rim, the back of the rim? Because I can remember coaches, instructing me and other players, aim just beyond the front of the rim. I can still hear coaches giving those different cues. So what's your take on that?
If you look, you have to clear that first rim, which means you have to kind of attain more than 32 degrees of that entry angle. But if you look at a rim, everybody thinks, okay, center. Well, that's actually wrong. It's usually the sweet spot on the rim. It's actually moved, if this is a backboard and this is a rim, right? It's actually moved 2 to 3 inches towards back, right? Towards the back of the rim. That's actually in order for ball to clear that first rim and enter, right? That is needed. So kind of a little bit, I call it, I focus on the first rim, but when I think about, okay, I focus on the first rim, which means I have to get over the first rim. You have actually players that have strategies that I'll focus on the second rim, on the back rim, right? And then aim short. I mean, if that works for them, that's fine. If he or she sees, that is, fruitful and that makes good shot, okay, that's fine. But again, when I coach somebody, I always say, aim for that first rim to kind of get over it, right? So,
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see, where am I at on my question list here? So, we've talked about where to aim, the trajectory of the shot. Some guys have a flat shot. Some guys have definitely a greater arc and trajectory. Let's get into a misconception here. So why is it thought that taller players, because again, are you 6'10", 6'11"?
I'm 6'9" on the roster, 6'9.5", if you really
Okay, he's tall. So why is it thought that taller players are not as proficient at shooting from deeper range as shorter players, typically guards? Nowadays, you're seeing those guards that are 6'5", 6'6", 6'7", 6'8". I mean, they can shoot. They can shoot. So, can you kind of clear up that misconception?
I don't know if I'm gonna give a definite answer here or firm answer, but I'll say this: taller players do have biomechanical advantage. So, if I say, okay, the taller you are, your shooting percentage should be higher, and somebody say, well, no, you mean other way? No. I mean, the taller you are, the greater the release height of the ball at that time point of the ball release, the greater chances are of attaining a successful shooting outcome. But then how we have tall players that are, not shooting well? Well, we're coming back to practice. I think that, if you're, sometimes it's it might be a mistake that is done by coaching personnel. Again, I know that is not the case all the time, but if you're tall or big, you're center. Okay, you're 2 dribbles, come back, shoot a hook shot, 2 dribbles in the middle, fake, pump fake, shoot a hook shot. That's all you do.
So coaches put you in a box from a young age.
And
say, oh, okay, you're this. So then you never develop the ball handling skills, the outside shooting, all of that, because it's like, go down on the post, get on the block, and that's what you do.
I think that might be a part of it. I don't think that's everything, but that is definitely a part of it. And I will say, for I'll boost myself, 6'10" guy. I think I just have to wear Air Maxes to be 6'10". But for a 6'10" guy, I will say I think that I was a solid and good shooter. And I think that at a higher release, and a taller player should have biomechanical advantage based on physics principles, right?
Right.
But again, what is what is causing the discrepancy, that, taller players, I mean, there's a lot of taller players. Nikola Jokic, I mean, I referred to him because he's from the same country, Serbia, but you thought Kevin Durant, I mean, he's tall, he's shooting big time percentages, right? So, you have a lot of players that can actually attain high level of shooting proficiency that are tall. So I think there's a lot of factors that is involved and incorporated into that equation. But yeah.
And I think as the game of basketball has changed, you are seeing a lot. Guys aren't just stuck down on the post; they're coming out. I mean, it's changed, just like strength training and nutrition, and I mean, there's always a change in every sport. I mean, sports evolve.
Yeah.
All right, so one more question here. So let's discuss how free throw shooting is practiced. All right, so many coaches will have players practice shooting a bunch of free throws at the beginning or end of practice. To simulate game situations, though, should a couple free throws be shot, kind of intermittently after, say, running some, suicide sprints up and down the court, when you're kind of in a fatigue state? Or should coaches just incorporate more free throw shooting attempts into, scrimmage situations? And what would this type of practice help to improve free throw percentages in games? Just asking you to speculate.
I'll say this: I'm a big supporter of practicing how you play. Shooting 10 free throw shots in a row. Well, I'll say this: I implemented that strategy in studies. I implemented that strategy in coaching. With who? Again, who are your athletes, participants? If you're teaching somebody proper shooting mechanics, well, then there's a purpose of performing 10, 20, 30
right, you
shots
drill it
in a row.
over and over
exactly.
and over again. Right.
But if that person, attains certain level of proficiency, and we are trying to prepare that athlete, in this case basketball player, to properly perform on court, right? That means that we have to align their training regimen to match the playing demands, right? Which means, I will run half court back, full court back, or 22s, up, down, come back, shoot 2 or 3 free throws, because that is realistic.
Right.
You're never shooting more than 3 free throws, right? Well, maybe there's a violation, you get fourth. But I mean, anyways, in a 99.9% of cases, you're not shooting more than 3 free throws, right?
Right.
So why would you practice 10 in a row? Well, 10, if you're teaching somebody how to properly implement these shooting biomechanics.
Youth, a 5th grader, you shoot over and over.
But I mean, if you're working with an athlete, okay, well, let's expose you to something that you're actually going to see on court during the game. So let's run and then shoot. I mean, even when I worked out with Coach Dean, he would be like, in the middle of practice, okay, run up and down 2 times. Okay, up, down, okay, 2 free throws.
Yep.
If I miss, I run again. So I better make.
Specific to game situations. Yeah.
So I think that is something that kind of aligns us and prepares that athlete for proper environment and proper training demands, game demands, in-game demands. Yeah.
All right. You have anything else you want to add?
No, I think this is great. I love these discussions. I can talk all day about basketball, but I appreciate you having me on your show, and I think that this is something that definitely I hope that people will find useful. And again, at the end of this video, you will have my contact information, and please feel free to share my contact information if somebody's interested to learn more about these studies and research that we're doing in Jayhawk Athletic Performance Lab. So I'm always open to talk basketball,
Yeah, we'll look out for more studies coming out from you.
I'll
in the
definitely
lab,
have to send you some.
So how can people contact you if they have questions about your research or improving their ability to play basketball?
They can contact me via email, which is D, my first initial, and my last name @ku.edu, or I guess I'm open and available on social media, LinkedIn, Dimitrije Cabarkapa, or Instagram, dr.dimitrije.cabarkapa, my first last name. So, I mean, if you have any questions or if there's anything I can help with, just reach out to me, let me know, and I'm more than willing to, schedule Zoom, meet with you, and start chatting about basketball. So
it's definitely a passion of his. So if you have any questions for me about the KU Exercise Science program, you can contact me at 913-897-8516, or you can send me an email, jtaylor@ku.edu. And thanks for watching this sports science edition of Fitness Facts.